All right. So before I start, I would like to welcome, first of all, the co-host, let's say, of this webinar, which is Professor Cristina Fossi from the University of Siena. Welcome, Cristina, again. Today, Cristina will be in a more relaxed role. And
a kind of Ancella of Tommy. So
thank you. And so basically, on Tuesday, we had the opportunity to follow some lectures and presentations focusing on the topic of marine litter monitoring approaches to assess its presence and effects. And today's webinar will be dealing with measures to prevent and mitigate the effects of marine litter. And this is how we are gonna basically complete the management cycle of marine litter that entails actions related to enhancing knowledge and generating fit-for-purpose data on the one side in order to serve the identification of tailor-made prevention and mitigation actions. And this e-course is being organized within the framework of the NECBC Plastic Pastas Cup project, as well as by MIO, which is a federation of environmental NGOs from all over the Mediterranean, and the University of Siena, in cooperation with an EU-funded project entitled Water and Environment Support in the ENI Neighbourhood South Region, the so-called WES. And so today's, the aim of today's webinar is to enhance your capacities in designing and implementing tailor-made measures to prevent and mitigate marine litter and from land-based sources and from sea-based sources. And in general, it is widely accepted that most of the marine litter, or a big fraction of the marine litter, is originating from land-based sources rather than sea-based sources in the Mediterranean. But we will actually come back to this particular statement in my next presentation, where I will be talking about the myths and misconceptions related to marine litter. When it comes to the agenda, here is just a quick overview. Basically, we are going to start off by having a more general presentation on different aspects related to marine litter and marine litter solutions, and we will try collectively to debunk some of the most common misconceptions and myths. And then we have made a small change in the agenda in order to accommodate our dear friend Katerina Anastasopoulou, who is a researcher at the Hellenic Marine Research Center, that she has a very packed agenda for today, and unfortunately she cannot stay with us for the entire webinar. So I hope that this is okay with all of you. So basically, today's webinar is clustered in two, or actually three main topics. One is related to myths and misconceptions. The other is related to examples of measures to address sea-based sources of marine litter, and the third one is related to addressing land measures and showcases to address land-based sources of marine litter. And we are very happy to have with us, as I already mentioned, Maria Cristina Fossi from the University of Siena, Katerina Anastasopoulou, who, as I already mentioned, is a researcher at the Hellenic Marine Research Center. And then we have also two managers of marine protected areas, Carlo Fransosini, who is a manager at Miramare MPA in Italy, and Gloria Garcia Hoyo, who is a manager at the Cabo de Gata and Yar MPA, which is located in Spain. And they will be sharing with us their long-standing experiences in preventing and mitigating marine litter. So just a couple of words about the participants of today's webinar. We have already 390 registrations received. I see that here at this particular moment we are 65, but for sure some more participants will join in, with the majority of the participants being from higher education, academic and research institutes, but also a considerable amount coming from the NGO sector, the sectoral agencies, and education and training centers and schools. So regarding the framework of this webinar, I would like to pass the floor to Cristina Fossi, who can provide you some information for those of you that didn't join yesterday's session on the framework of this webinar and the wider initiative within which it's been implemented. So Cristina, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Tommy, and welcome to everyone to participate to this second day of the webinar. As mentioned from Tommy, the webinar is organized in the framework of the NECBC project Plastic Buster Cup. The Plastic Buster Cup is a capitalization project in which we are involved 6 different countries in the Mediterranean Sea: Italy, Greece, Spain, and Tunisia, Lebanon, and Jordania, with the main aim to capitalize the main outcome of several European project at Mediterranean level in order to have a complete management cycle of marine litter, starting from the diagnostic phase and the monitoring approach that we have presented the first day to define specific mitigation action. And it's very important to say that this project, if you can move on the second slide, Tommy, please, is a part of a more general initiative called Plastic Buster project, and that project have a very long story, starting more than 10 years ago under the umbrella of the United Nations, and then was defined as flagship project from Union for Mediterranean, covering the complete cycle of marine litter, from harmonizing methodological approach, diagnosis of impact, identify marine litter hotspot, and particularly define specific mitigation action and implement supporting the governance at Mediterranean scale. And we are extremely happy to say that we are in line really to obtain and achieve some of these first stream that we have into the 2013, when we try to binding together the North and the South Mediterranean Sea in the same language and the same approach to try to monitor and mitigate the impact of marine litter at Mediterranean scale. So enjoy very much this second day of training, and that will be extremely linked to what we have already said in the previous day, the diagnostic phase. So all this diagnostic approach will serve to design specific mitigation action, as we can see today. So thank you very much, Tommy.
Thank you very much, Cristina, for this very nice and concise introduction of the wider framework of this webinar. And just before I move on to the presentation, I would like to just mention a couple of housekeeping rules. So first of all, kindly please keep your microphones muted in order to have a good quality of sound for all the participants attending. As I already mentioned, for those newcomers, this session is being recorded. And today's webinar, together with the webinar of Tuesday, will be, and with the training materials, will be shared with you by tomorrow. So keep that in mind. And lastly, kindly feel free to ask questions in the chat, and then we will try, together with the rest of the speakers, to respond to these questions in the planned Q&A sessions of this webinar. All right. So now, moving to the presentation dealing with different aspects related to the issue of marine litter, with a special emphasis on solutions, and debunking the myths and misconceptions, which was basically at the heart of the entire Plastic Busters initiative and the previous project that was being implemented in coastal and marine protected areas. All right, so here are, first of all, the topic of plastic pollution has gained a lot of momentum and a lot of attention the past decade or so. And here are some covers of very well-known journals and books talking about plastic, a toxic love story, talking about the plastic soup, talking about a life without plastic, or about the biggest fraud related to plastic, planet or plastic, and so on and so forth. And as you see, a lot of these covers are quite provocative, and we are actually gonna take a closer look and on all these statements, which a lot of these are mainly phrased in such a way in order to attract attention and appeal to our emotions, rather than reflecting the actual science that surrounds the topic of marine litter. So obviously plastic is everywhere. So this is precisely why we are talking about that we are experiencing the Plastocene era. And the topic of marine litter and marine plastic pollution has, apart from public attention, has gained a lot of attention by researchers. And here you can actually see the evolution of the publication of research articles on the topic in the last 20 years. Yes?
I think you have not changed the presentation. We see the previous one.
That is strange because
I think also some other.
Just a second to check because
interrupt you, but
no, it's okay. Let me just check. Just a second. I will reshare my screen because I don't know, something may have happened. So now do you see the correct title? Okay.
Title. Thank you. Sorry.
Okay. No, thank you, Cristina. Okay, so everything is okay now, right?
Perfect.
Okay. So as I was saying, here on this slide, you can actually, and the previous slide was this one, okay, with the different covers of different journals and publications. Okay, so as you can see on this slide, basically in 2020, the amount of articles, research articles published on the topic of plastic pollution was more than, was actually almost 1,800 articles, while at the beginning of 2000, there were less than 200 articles published on this topic. So you can see that researchers have increasingly been focusing either on documenting the threat or featuring information on the different prevention and mitigation actions. And unfortunately, a lot of the myths and misconceptions, they're not only relevant for the actual problem and the understanding of the problem, but also extend to the entire management cycle of marine litter. And there are a lot of misunderstandings related to what is an appropriate solution to addressing the problem. And we are going to start basically from some common misconception about the plastic pollution sources. Here on this figure, you can see, as I already mentioned, that in the Mediterranean, it is widely acknowledged that land-based sources contribute the largest amount of marine litter. Land-based sources refer to tourism and recreational activities, refer to discharges of untreated municipal waste, to industrial outfalls and poor waste management, and the sea-based sources refer to offshore mining, shipping, fisheries, and aquaculture. But of course, this is very, very relevant because obviously when we, because first of all, the sources basically reflect the pressures of particular location. So obviously, if we go to a tourism and recreational site, obviously the main source of marine litter will be tourism and recreational activities. But if we go to a fisheries in the vicinity of a fisheries and aquaculture plant, obviously fisheries and aquaculture related items will be the types of items found in higher abundances. So the misconception here lies many times to the figures reported. You may have heard the so-called 80% of litter comes from land-based sources and 20% from sea-based sources. This figure is entirely inaccurate. It could be true for some specific locations, but in general is inaccurate. And in fact, it comes from a statement that was made in the 70s by a United Nations coordinator, and it may or may not reflect the reality on the ground. So coming back now to the importance of land-based sources versus sea-based sources, assessing the relative importance of the different sources is very challenging. Yesterday, on Tuesday, we were discussing about the joint list, and if you remember, there was one class of litter items that was not attributed to any kind of use. So the so-called non-identified, sourced litter items. This means that these litter items can be coming from different types of activities. For example, one plastic drinking bottle could be coming from a tourist on the beach, could be coming from a tourist on board of a cruise ship, or could be coming from a worker working in a fisheries and aquaculture plant. So we cannot say with a high level of certainty where this plastic drinking bottle came from, for example. And therefore, the biggest, almost 50% of the litter items that are being surveyed cannot be attributed to either land-based or sea-based sources. So this is an uncomfortable truth, but this is the truth. Then, regarding the different data that are published, pinpointing tourism and recreational activities being the major source of the problem. The uncomfortable reality is that the majority of data come from beach litter surveys. And only in the recent years, we have increasingly data coming from floating litter and seafloor litter surveys or from surveys in biota. So, typically, the beaches that were surveyed had to be accessible to the surveyors, and typically they were tourism and recreational locations, either located in front of hotels or in the vicinity of food and beverage outlets, and so on and so forth. Therefore, these results are biased towards reflecting marine litter inputs coming from tourism and recreational activities. This is precisely why when on Tuesday we were discussing the strategy for selecting survey sites and the criteria, it was explicitly mentioned that these sites need to represent a variety of locations and not just tourism and recreational destinations. Then another common, let's say, misconception is related to the origin of marine litter and the so-called transboundary effect. By origin, we mean the geographical origin. Oftentimes, we have been hearing the argument that some countries cannot do much about the litter items and the marine litter pollution simply because these litter items are coming from other countries. And this can be true. There are currents that can transport litter items very far away from their actual source, but modeling exercises implemented in the Mediterranean have shown that the majority of litter items come from the same country. So let's say 90% of the litter items originate from the country itself, and then maybe a small percentage comes from another country, of course, excluding countries that are very, very close or areas that are on the border. This is a specific case. But also documenting this transboundary effect is very difficult because we live in a world of free merchandise. So imagine even the barcode, let's say, of a product that could indicate that this product, for example, has been produced, let's say, in Greece, all right? This product could have been easily purchased in Greece by a large cruise ship and then finds its way being discarded somewhere in the open sea of Spain. So this doesn't mean that just because we find litter items with Greek barcodes that they traveled so far away to Spain, rather than there are other explanations oftentimes as to why these litter products find its way in waters of other countries. The same could be that, for example, cargo was lost at sea, or for example, in the Balkan Peninsula, oftentimes people come from one country to shop in another country simply because products are cheaper, and then they transport them in their country, they consume them, and they discard the litter, not just in the Balkan Peninsula, this could be anywhere in the world. So you understand that arguments put the blame on other countries for the source of marine litter are kind of weak when it comes to the science behind it. It's very difficult scientifically to document that litter originates from another country. And this is something to keep in mind when identifying measures. And then another important aspect is the concept of riverine inputs. First of all, we don't consider rivers as sources of marine litter. We consider them as pathways of marine litter. So it is a transport mechanism of marine litter. And this was actually on Tuesday, one of the participants mentioned that in order to stop or to minimize plastic pollution, we need to act at rivers. And this is indeed one part of the solution, in particular in countries that are affected by riverine inputs of litter. So moving on from these sources, all right. So when it comes to the composition, so basically the majority of marine litter is made of plastics. This is 70 to 90%. And basically, this is simply because the majority of products that we use in our daily lives are made out of plastic. So it makes only sense to find plastics in the coastal and marine environment. And this leakage of plastics occurs at all stages of the production, use, and disposal cycle. So we can have at the very first phases of the production of plastics, we can have mermaid tears, for example, the pellets used for the for making the different plastic products. It can occur during the transport of a product that has been made, or also in the disposal phase from a consumer that irresponsibly discards a litter item on the coastal and marine environment. And in the Mediterranean, a large amount of these items are single-use plastic items, and we are going to come back to that and see exactly what these are. But also, there are areas that, in fact, have fisheries and aquaculture-related items as the most abundant litter items categories. And in fact, in a study that we performed back in 2016, we demonstrated that almost 40% of litter items in certain areas are coming from fisheries and aquaculture. And actually, fisheries and certain fisheries items are considered single-use plastic items and are part of the Single-Use Plastics Directive at European level. Now, when it comes to microplastics, Unfortunately, as we discussed on Tuesday, the majority of microplastics comes from further fragmentation of macroplastics. So it's very difficult to estimate how many microplastics are entering the marine environment. It is easier perhaps to estimate how many pellets, how many primary microplastics are entering the marine environment, but the secondary ones, which is the biggest fraction, is very difficult to estimate, simply because we have no idea of how much of these macroplastics into how many microplastics they fragment on a certain time-wise basis. And but what we do know is that microplastics greatly outnumber the large plastic items, and we do know that even if releases of plastic to the environment would cease, even as we speak, the number of microplastics in the ocean would be expected to continue to increase as a result of continuous fragmentation. And we have been discussing about this on Tuesday. In fact, worldwide, there is a large number of marine species that has been recorded to have interacted with litter, meaning that they have either get entrapped in litter or they have ingested litter. I'm not saying impacted in the sense that a lot of these species somehow have a solid defense mechanisms, and they're not necessarily impacted by, there are no impacts on their health just because they ingested litter. And this is actually something that Cristina was talking about on Tuesday, that we need more sophisticated approaches in order to investigate whether marine species have been actually exerting negative impacts by their interaction with litter. But we do know that a lot of species are interacting with litter, and we do know that there has been a huge increase on species that are affected or have encountered marine litter. And a lot of these species are threatened or protected species. So there are still a lot of uncertainties surrounding the topic of marine litter impacts. There is still uncertainty regarding to the extent of the harm caused to marine species by ingestion. And there are uncertainties also regarding to which extent these species are exposed to the called plasticizers that Cristina was talking about on Tuesday. Unfortunately, yet there is no evidence to support or refute potential biomagnification of particles or associated chemicals. So this is still under investigation. And then basic toxicological data on the consumption of microplastics and nanoplastics by humans for food risk safety assessment are still lacking. And therefore, oftentimes we see that for publicity, visibility reasons, we see one plate with one fish and in association with plastic pollution and the sign of toxicity. In fact, this is totally, I dare say, unscientific, in the sense that this has not been documented. Plus, the majority of exposure of humans to microplastics and nanoplastics is not occurring through the sea, but it's occurring through the air with all these that we are constantly inhaling, coming actually from our clothes or coming from airborne pollution and so on and so forth. So still there are a lot of uncertainties. And lastly, the same applies for the economic impact of marine litter, because it's very difficult to assess the inhibition of the proper functioning of marine ecosystems. And the difficulties related to microplastics and in terms of assessing their impact is related to the actual nature of microplastics. And the nature is relevant to differences in the sizes of microplastics, differences in the shape, in the chemical additives that they have, in the concentrations, in the measurement approaches, All of these factors are affecting how a microplastic will impact a living organism. So this is precisely why there are a lot of uncertainties surrounding the topic. And a lot of experiments, toxicological or ecotoxicological experiments that have been performed in order to study this are using very high, as in most of these kind of experiments, are using very high concentrations in order to observe any kind of impact, which these concentrations are not common in the natural environment. And so most of microplastics go in and out of most of organisms because organisms have defense mechanisms. And so further research is still required in order to see to which extent serious risk is being posed by microplastics to living organisms, but nevertheless, we should be implementing the precautionary approach and trying to minimize this kind of potential threat in the coastal and marine environment. So, coming back to the topic of the plastic age, here you can actually see how the production, the global plastic production has evolved through time, starting from the 50s with a very low production. And in fact, coming now to the 2020, where the production has reached 400 million tons per year and is forecasted to continuously increase and expected to double by the year of 2035. Why has this happened? Simply because plastics exert some benefits. And these benefits, are because plastics are durable, they're lightweight, they're versatile, and they have a relatively small cost. Many claim that they are inexpensive. In fact, they are not inexpensive because there are hidden costs associated with the environmental consequences of plastics. However, they are indeed a material that is characterized by a rather small cost. And this is precisely why we are going through the plastic age. It is no accident. And this is also precisely why statements of the kind planet or plastic, obviously we cannot live without plastic. There is no other material out there that can replace the benefits that plastics bring. And not only that, there is all materials, including glass, including paper, all of them have environmental consequences as well. Nothing is innocent. And we are going to come back to that topic. So this is the type of plastics that is being used here it's clustered by different sectors. So the biggest sector that uses plastics is the packaging sector, and then the building and construction sector, the textile sector, and then we have the transportation and the electronic sector, and so on and so forth. So this is precisely why it makes sense, since we use most of the items in the packaging sector are made of plastics, then in the coastal and marine environment, a big part of the items that we find are related to packaging, to any kind of packaging. And so rather than talking about a life without plastics, which at this particular moment is not possible, maybe in 5 years or 10 years, some new material will be invented that will have the benefits of plastics, but it will not have the downsides of plastics. But for the time being, I dare say that we are stuck with this material. So the only option that we have is to move away from linear consumption of plastics and move forward to the wise use of plastics within the context of a circular economy. But of course, this is very easy to say, but when it comes to actually operationalizing this, putting it into practice, there are difficulties and challenges to be faced. And in fact, this is what we will be discussing today with the different speakers of the webinar. So the circle looks really nice. And all of us oftentimes, when we think about the sustainable use of plastics, we are thinking about recycling of plastics. But recycling of plastics is not something that easy, you know, there are limitations and complications. So this is something for all of us to keep in mind. And for example, the plastic recycling has high costs associated with infrastructure and processing. The quality of plastic degrades during recycle because there might be contaminants, or we have different types of plastics that are put together, and then obviously if we don't have many different streams of plastics and these are mixed together, the recycled product is of lower quality. And then some complications is that you know, the producers need to take responsibility in terms of how for the post life of the plastic product, in order to enable the effective and efficient recycling of a product, and also ways to overcome this are to make sure that there is a mandatory use of recycled content in plastic products in order to increase demand for recyclables. So this, the extended producer responsibility and the mandatory use of recycled content is a way, on the one hand, to improve the quality of the recycled plastic, and on the other side, to ensure that the recycled plastic will be used. These topics have not yet been entirely addressed or resolved. And these, even though we have been talking about recycling of plastics for many, many years, in many countries, these topics still need further elaboration. So now another interesting topic. Can marine plastics that are in the coastal and marine environment, can be recycled? And when I talk about recycling, I talk about mechanical recycling, right? Because there is a lot of discussion whether chemical recycling is recycling at all. In fact, in terms of legislation, chemical recycling is not being considered as recycling of plastics. So when I talk about recycling, I talk about mechanical recycling. So here in these images, first of all, what you see a lot of different types of plastics, okay? Plastics that are weathered, plastics that are full of marine organisms, so they are contaminated. So these plastics, the uncomfortable truth is that in general, they cannot be recycled, so mechanically. So unless, you know, very clean litter items are being collected and sorted in a certain way, and they're freshly deposited on the coastal and marine environment, and they could be then collected and recycled, the majority of litter items, marine litter items, cannot be recycled, and this is an inconvenient truth. So, in order to understand a little bit better plastics, their behavior, and the possibilities that exist out there for their end-of-life treatment, the plastic items are classified in two major categories: in thermoplastics, which are capable of being repeatedly molded or deformed plastically when heated, and this is what we refer to as recycling. And then thermosets, which when formed, they cannot be remolded by melting. And the most common thermoplastics are polyethylene, polypropylene, high and low density polyethylene, polystyrene, expanded polystyrene, polyvinyl chloride, polypropylene, polylactic acid. And when it comes to the thermosets, the most common ones are polyurethane, epoxy resin, silicone, acrylic resins, and so on and so forth. And on the right-hand side, you can see some common products made by certain polymers. So from high density polypropylene are milk bottles, freezer bags, shampoo bottles, ice cream containers. From polyethylene, terephthalate, there are the so-called PET are bottles for water and other drinks, dispensing containers for cleaning fluids and other product trays. And also what you can see is that with lighter green are the items, the types of polymers that can be recycled more easier. Then with the darker green are those that can be recycled, but it's a little bit more difficult. And then you see that the polystyrene and expanded polystyrene at the bottom of the list, out of which cutlery, plates, and cups are made, are much more difficult to recycle. And this is something to be considered when identifying measures to deal with the problem. So now, apart from this classification of plastics, another classification that has been used, we have been hearing about bio-based plastics and petrol-based plastics. And many times, people, simply because the term bio is used, they think that, you know, inherently the product is environmental friendly, just because somebody named this product bio. But this is not exactly the case. And in particular for plastics, bio-based plastics basically are plastics that are made from renewable resources. So for manufacturing plastics, corn, potatoes, rice, wheat, and vegetable oils are being used. While in the case of petrol-based plastics, petroleum-based resources are being used. So once the plastic is being formed, either from bio-based sources or from petrol-based sources, the actual synthetic polymer that comes out is the same. Okay, so basically we can have polyethylene coming from bio-based plastics, from bio-based sources, and we can have polyethylene coming from petrol-based sources. So at the end of the day, the plastics that are being produced are precisely the same in terms of their chemical composition, and the only difference is the source of material used in order to produce them. Now, somebody might argue that it is much better to use renewable resources for manufacturing plastics than non-renewable petroleum resources. But unfortunately, life is not so simple. Answers are not so straightforward. And then considering that renewable resources require corn, potatoes, rice, plants, require monocultures, require pesticides, require water. We can understand, all of us, that things are not so straightforward from a life cycle perspective of the production of plastics. So there are no easy responses, there are no easy solutions, and always there is a compromise and a balance to be found. Coming back now to another important attribute, another important feature of plastics is the degradation process of plastics. So as degradation is defined the process that induces changes in the polymer properties, deterioration of the functionality due to chemical, physical, or biological reactions. I will not go into details, but the important thing that all of you need to understand is that plastics can degrade. All plastics, first of all, degrade. Okay. So and we will come back to the topic, when we talk about biodegradation and biodegradable plastics, and suddenly everybody's happy that conventional or common plastics will be converted into biodegradable plastics, degradation is a feature of all plastics. So the question is, or the difference is, A, the factor that is causing the degradation. So it can be heat. So we talk about thermal degradation. It can be sunlight. And then we talk about photodegradation. It can be from oxygen. So we talk about oxidative degradation. It can be hydrolytic. So we talk about from water, sorry, and we could talk about hydrolytic degradation. It can be stress, some power or something, and we talk about mechanical degradation, and then it can be the presence of microorganisms, and this is when we talk about biodegradation. So in essence, the term biodegradation refers simply to the fact that this plastic can degrade by the presence of microorganisms. It doesn't refer to the magical disappearance of plastics. It doesn't refer to a better or faster necessarily degradation of plastics. And we are going to come back to this very important topic because it has affected severely action on the ground. And nowadays, policy and decision makers are discovering or are experiencing the problems that have been caused. So, first of all, we have been hearing a lot about substituting conventional plastics with bio-based plastics. So, is this a solution for the problem of marine litter? The answer is clear, no. For marine litter, it doesn't matter if the plastic originated from starch or corn, or if it originated from petrol-based resources. Simply because the polymer that this plastic item is made of is the same, and so in a marine environment, it behaves in a certain way. Maybe this is a solution for other sectors, but not for the marine litter and marine plastic pollution. Then cleanups. Are they a solution? Can we just focus on cleanups and resolve the problem? The answer is no. First of all, because considering the different geographical features of our planet, rocky areas, inaccessible areas, very long coastlines, seafloors, floating litter, microplastics, nanoplastics. Can we believe that we could potentially remove all this? No, even if today we would stop and we would collectively try for decades to remove all sorts of plastics from the coastal and marine environment, this would be impossible. Yes, it can be a solution in a very localized area, in a marine litter hotspot. Yes, this can resolve the problem at local scale. Yes, cleanup operations can be used for raising awareness, and this is part of the solution. But just focusing on cleanup operations is not the way forward. And then coming back to replacing plastics with biodegradable plastics. Biodegradable plastics, as I explained, are not magical. So when they are on the coastal and marine environment, they don't disappear. They just behave a little bit differently than conventional plastics. So what happens to them is that they degrade faster, but not fully. So basically they fragment into smaller bits and parts, and then with the winds, with the waves, they are transferred in the marine environment where the conditions, the presence of microorganisms, the presence of heat, and the presence of light is limited, which means that they don't fully degrade, and they just add on to the problem of microplastics. In addition to that, they create a problem for recycling, because if the recycling stream has a big percentage of biodegradable plastics, then the end product of the recycling process is of lower quality, and then this recyclable cannot find its place to the market and to its reuse. And the question is, are they a solution? Yes, they could be a solution for very restricted applications, assuming that there is a framework in place to treat these biodegradable plastics, a policy or a management framework, basically, where biodegradables would be collected separately. Okay, considering the Mediterranean realities, can you imagine having collecting separately plastics, separately biodegradable plastics. I don't see this at this particular moment, maybe in the future, but for the time being, we don't have this kind of legislative framework to do that. And in addition to that, when we talk about degradation, biodegradation, then basically, and compostable plastics, we take at the end of the day compost. So basically, we cannot, this is, and we will come back to that, within the circular economy concept, this is not considered because as a new material or the same material that is remaining in the loop, it kind of escapes the loop. It becomes compost and that's it. It cannot be reintroduced in the loop of circular economy. So these are all things to keep in mind when solutions are being introduced. And so nowadays, after this big boom of replacing shopping bags with biodegradable bags, now we see that the efforts are more focusing on reusing bags and minimizing the use of conventional bags. And simply because the industry oriented initially when the different restrictions about plastics and came into force, in particular the Single-Use Plastics Directive, and a lot of actors in the industry sector focused on producing plastic items from bio-based and biodegradable plastics. The European Commission came back with guidelines on how to implement the single-use plastic products, and here is an extract of these guidelines that it's very interesting, that plastics manufactured with modified natural polymers or plastics manufactured from bio-based fossil or synthetic starting substances are not naturally occurring, and therefore they are addressed by the Single-Use Plastics Directive and they are considered as being plastics. So there is no bio-based plastics are not considered to be any better than conventional plastics. This is the one part. And the adapted definition of plastics also covers polymer-based rubber items and bio-based and biodegradable plastics, regardless of whether they are derived from biomass or are intended to biodegrade over time. So, as you see, replacing plastic straws, conventional plastic straws with biodegradable plastic straws, there is no difference in when it comes to the actual directive, and they are considered to be the same. So now coming back to another aspect, and this is the chemical recycling. You see the term recycling in inverted commas, because there is nowadays a lot of discussion at policy fora whether chemical processing of plastics is recycling per se. And so the answer to this question is that A, chemical recycling is energy intensive, it produces greenhouse gas emissions, it requires and emits chemicals, and it's difficult when it comes to logistical and economic aspects to their collection and sorting. So basically this technology for chemical recycling is largely in the research and development phase. And here you see an image of fishing nets, because basically, at least in Europe, a lot of chemical recycling has been promoted as a circular economy solution to fishing gear, to certain types of fishing gear, where basically with the chemical recycling approach, we can depolymerize fishing nets and we can go to the monomers or oligomers that can then lead to nylon 6 and basically produce new products. Okay, this sounds very ideal, but and of course, a lot of this work is patented, so we don't yet know the exact amount and the exact types of chemicals involved in this chemical processing, recycling of fishing nets. So here, there is not a straightforward question. Maybe chemical recycling could be a solution as long as we have studied all the implications from a life cycle perspective, meaning energy needs, meaning emissions, meaning chemical demands, and meaning logistical and economic implications. So what are the main pillars for addressing the topic of marine litter? For sure, the waste hierarchy is at the heart of marine litter prevention and mitigation interventions. So the most favorable approach is to try to phase out or eliminate the use of certain items, certain types of packaging, for example. Then to try and reuse, use reusable options. For example, we could have networks of coffee bars that use reusable coffee to go cups. Then reduction perhaps of the materials that are used in making a plastic product, reduction in providing, for example, plastic bags in the supermarkets. And then at the fourth step is the option of replacing items, but replacing them with another material that has demonstrated a more sustainable, a more environmental friendly performance. So as we saw initially, the idea of replacing plastic bags with biodegradable plastic bags, this was not basically a better alternative when it comes to the topic of marine litter. Okay, replacing, for example, a plastic straw with an actual straw, yes, this has a better environmental performance. Or replacing a plastic cup with non-plastic coated paper cup that is being produced by sustainable forestry is a more environmental friendly option. And lastly, to ensure that whatever is being used can be recycled effectively. So these are the main principles that should be at the heart of marine litter prevention and mitigation interventions. So this was actually just an overview of different aspects related to solution, different ideas, different approaches, misconceptions that existed out there. I see that there are some questions already. I will respond to this. However, I would like to pass the floor first to my dear colleague Katerina Anastasopoulou, because unfortunately she doesn't have, she cannot stay throughout the webinar. So basically, Katerina will be talking about solutions in the related to sea-based sources of marine litter. And just a second, Katerina, before I pass the floor to you, can everyone see my slide now that I'm showing? No, because I haven't shared the screen. Just a second. So I guess now you can see the slide. Okay. All right. So basically what I wanted to say here is that this particular session will focus on sea-based sources of marine litter. And as we mentioned, sea-based sources are fisheries, aquaculture, shipping, and offshore mining. When we talk about shipping, it could be merchandise shipping, but it could be also tourism and recreational shipping, okay? And there are different measures to address these sources. Obviously, we don't have the time to go through every single type of measures, but here you can see an indicative palette of these measures. Katerina will be talking about establishing a derelict fishing gear management scheme to tackle fisheries and aquaculture sectors. Then Carlo, our next speaker, will be talking about promoting the sustainable management of mussel farming nets, which is a big problem in many areas of the Mediterranean. But there are also other types of measures like the targeted removal of litter from the seafloor, activities meant to raise the awareness of fishermen, and the so-called passive fishing for litter actions, actions to improve port reception facilities and encourage the disposal of waste by ships at ports. And also actions to raise the awareness, to raise the capacities, and to improve the management practices on board on the ships. So now, Katerina, it's the time to pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
Go ahead.
Perfect. Good morning to all of you. I will present a derelict fishing gear management scheme. Derelict fishing gear is recognized as a critical problem for the marine life and the marine environment. And let's see, what is derelict fishing gear? Derelict fishing gear is any abandoned, lost, or otherwise discarded fishing gear in the marine environment. There are two categories of waste fishing gear. The first category is the abandoned, lost, and discarded fishing gear in the marine environment. Very often is known as ghost gears because these invisible gears, as you can see in this image, that they are no more under the fisherman control, continues to fish for a long time. The second category is the end-of-life fishing gear, which are the old gears, the unused gears, the damaged gears, gears that are no more needed and for this reason are discarded, and the aquaculture solid waste, like the mussel net or the offshore cage nets. Very often, this type of waste is deposited on the port due to the lack of any management plan for the fishing gears. There are many reasons why a fishing gear ends up as derelict, but the problem is not so simple because in most cases there are a combination of several different factors and variables accountable for it. Some of them are the illegal, the unreported and unregulated fishing, and environmental factors like severe weather events, currents, etc., gear conflict, the fishing gear entanglement with rocks, corals, wrecks, with other fishing gear or even with other fishing vessels, theft and vandalism, the gear condition, the gear breakage, the gear age, the intentional abandonment and discarding, and the gear overuse. The most common gears contributing and becoming derelict are the nets, gill nets, troll nets, nets from aquaculture, pots and traps, which targeting specific animal groups, and the lines. Derelict fishing gears have many negative effects on marine environment and marine life. For example, they continue to entangle and trap animals, destroy benthic habitats and communities. Coral reefs are very sensitive to this kind of pollution, but also have economical impacts. For example, they can cause damage to the vessels wrapping around the propellers or destroy the fishing gears. Replacing or buying new fishing gears is highly costly. Fishing, including aquaculture, as all of us know, plays a fundamental role in the economy worldwide from the past till now. A variety of fishing gears are used by both sectors, and potentially part of them, directly or indirectly, can end up in the marine environment. Let's see now what is a derelict fishing gear management scheme. It's a measure for the reduction of marine litter generating by fisheries and aquaculture sectors ending up in the coastal and marine environment. The scheme includes collection, sorting, transport, treatment, recycling, reuse, and the final disposal of fishing litters. However, except of this main aim, this scheme is also has some specific objectives, which are to enhance the understanding of the derelict fishing gear problem. And how can be this done? By collecting as more information we can for the types, quantities, sources, pathways, and so on. Promote co-responsibility among the stakeholders involved in the fishing gear management process. A good starting point could be among fishermen and aquaculture associations, waste management authorities, local and port authorities, and of course, many other parties. Promote best practices for the proper management. Restore coastal and marine ecosystems through cleanup or removal activities, especially at shallow waters, and improve public awareness, aiming in attitudinal or behavioral changes. In this slide, you can see the steps of a derelict fishing gear management scheme. The steps, one by one, will be analyzed immediately. We are starting for the first step, the identification of coordinator. The coordinator will be responsible of designing and implementing such a management scheme. For this reason, this person should be aware for the national and regional legislation and policies, has the expertise of capacity building and raising activities, work closely with fishermen and aquaculture farmers and engage them to ensure their involvement in the scheme, estimate operational and logistical requirements of the scheme, evaluate alternative options for treatment, identify the most appropriate one, select the suitable per case location for the disposal and storage of the fishing gear waste, monitor and support the implementation stages, define and agree responsibility among all involved parties, suggest improvements of the scheme based on feedback, on frequent feedback and utilizing best practices, and evaluate the effectiveness of the scheme along with the overall impact. The second step is the definition of operational and logistical requirements. There are several steps and variables to be considered when designing such a scheme. Special requirements of fisheries and aquaculture sectors should be taken into account. Some issues related with this step and should be taken into account are the parameters, type, sizes, composition, quantities, and condition of derelict fishing gears waste, the alternative options for the treatment, the existing available facilities and infrastructure for the collection, sorting, and storage, the transportation options, approval permits and required licenses, the current awareness and experience of all persons involved in this scheme, the existing waste management scheme and management plans, the operations need for cleanup and removal activities, and the environmental and economic implications. Step 3, stakeholder engagement. Engaging with stakeholders is very important for the success of the management scheme. Stakeholders will be engaged in the design phase and contribute to the associated operational and logistical requirements. A good start point will be among the local authorities and the fisheries and the aquaculture associations, where different views, attitudes, and behaviors will be explored and recorded for further treatment. Step 4. Selection of a derelict fishing gear treatment and management company. Fishing gears are very mixed material to work with. They contain several other materials like sand, mud, organic materials, even heavy metal residues. Depending on the types and several other factors, there are 3 main options for treatment: the mechanical recycling, the chemical recycling, and the thermal processing. Step 5, identification of appropriate locations and set up a derelict fishing gear disposal and storage points. The selection of the most appropriate location to establish for the installation of derelict fishing gears bins or containers is very important, especially for countries with extensive coastlines, because in these countries there are a lot of landing sites far away from the main port. Elaboration and establishment of a derelict fishing gear pickup and transport scheme. Depending on the types and the quantities of fishing gears collected, it should be selected the most appropriate option for their transportation. Stage 5. Promote co-responsibility towards the proper management of the fishing gear throughout their lives. This step is aiming in promoting best practices for the proper usage, storage, and disposal of fishing gears, leading to co-responsibility among all involved sectors and raising awareness. Step 8, assessment of environmental and economic impact and implications for the derelict fishing gear management scheme. The assessment of economic and environmental benefits is necessary for the improvement of this scheme from year to year. As you understand, all these benefits vary according to several factors like the types, the quantities, the location waste, and many other factors. And now we can move to the research, the role of which is very important for all environmental problems. I will present two pilot actions. The first one is the collection of derelict fishing gears, which implemented by the Hellenic Center of Marine Research Scientists within the frame of the Fish Gear project in Northeast Ionian Sea around the Corfu Island in the Mediterranean. So the first step during this pilot action was the identification of a recycling company. After that, all fishing gears that are not more used and located in several places, in our cases, most of these unused, damaged and old fishing gears were located in the yards of the houses of the fishermen, were transferred in a container which had been bought by the HCMR and located in the main port of Corfu. This container was used as a workplace, and in which all these fishing gears were checked for the nylon 6, because this was the only item that could be recycled from the company that had been selected. A total of 2 tons of gears were collected and transferred by the Health Seas in the recycling company. The second pilot action was implemented within the frame of Plastic Busters MPA by the MIO office and the IC. You can see in this picture the top 5 aquaculture and fisheries related litter items, and in total around 7,050 and 500 tons of gears of mussel nets were collected. Closing, I would like to say that although all these measures are very useful, as in each environmental problem, we must focus on prevention measures, as also Thomais presented in her talk earlier. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Katerina. Thank you very much for this comprehensive presentation of how this kind of measure could be put in practice. Obviously, it's a very complicated topic. It's not, we make an effort here in the limited time frame to present some, just to give you all an idea of how this measure could be operationalized on the ground and get you an idea of what kind of logistics are involved. Before we move to Carlos' presentation, because we have still Katerina with us, I would like to go through the type of comments and questions that were made throughout mine and her presentation, and try to respond to any questions together. So first of all, okay, just to restate that the recording of the lectures and the presentations themselves will be circulated to all participants, and from today and from Tuesday via email by tomorrow. Okay, so just to get that clear. The second thing is we got here a very interesting question by Sam Nada from Egypt. So how could we consider using plastic as fuel in some industries instead of coal, for example, in the cement industry? Okay, this is a very talking about incineration of plastics for the production of energy is something that has been addressed by many debates. Thankfully, in the Europe, we have all of us agreed that this is the least favored option, the incineration, for a number of reasons. And one of these reasons, for example, is that burning plastics is not innocent. Burning plastics, apart from CO2 emissions, it releases toxic chemicals, it can release metals, and it can also release dioxins. So the kind of infrastructure that is required in order to safely incinerate plastics is quite complicated. And I dare say that if countries of the North have not effectively mastered this kind of technology, for countries of the South to be able to do that safely with a minimum environmental and human health impact is very difficult. So this would be one factor why not going for incineration of plastics in the industrial sector. Another aspect would be that in general, these incinerators, they constantly need to run, and so they constantly need to be fed with fuel, so with plastics. So then they would compete with the recycling of plastics. So, you know, it is already difficult to ensure that the biggest part of plastics has been recycled. In fact, a very small, I think one study at Mediterranean level or global level shows that only 10% of plastics has been recycled. So it would make things even more challenging. And so another question would be, where these incinerators will be located. And there are a lot of discussions about inequality, because usually these incinerators are installed in sort of poor areas or poorer countries. So maybe not in the developed north, and maybe in our countries. So there is it's quite complicated with not how to say straightforward added value to the entire management process of plastics. Plus, incineration is not considered part of the circular economy because the material basically just goes out of the circle. It's again more part of the linear approach, where we have the waste and then we need to do something with it, and we make something that then it exits the circle. So we convert it into energy. So now another, I hope I responded to the extent that my knowledge allows me to respond to this question. Plastic recycling intuitively makes sense, but what are the actual benefits compared to the costs? In fact, first of all, about the costs, it may seem that recycling is costly simply because the actual cost of non-recycling is not included in the price of the virgin plastic. So it is, how to say, it's kind of an artificial problem in the sense that if every material that is put out there on the market was actually including the cost of its environmental management, then we would have a very different option, and recycling of plastics would be basically recycled plastic would be cheaper in comparison to virgin plastic. This is one point. And the second point, because I don't know, the question came from Nuren Rabai. I don't know your background, but you know, not environmental problems cannot be only viewed from an economic point of view, in the sense that what if we don't recycle plastics? What's the other option? To landfill them, you know, to incinerate them. We already discussed what is the problem with incineration. So we don't, the best option that we have, apart from the elimination, phasing out, apart from the reuse, and so on and so forth, is to recycle and to mold it into new products. And then I see that there is a point about cleanups, and that after 60, Anas is saying that after 16 cleanups that they have done with his group, they found that people and local citizens are more and more aware of the danger of litter and special plastic pollution. So of course, cleanups are not the perfect solution, but it helps a lot for raising awareness, especially in their community. And it's true that this is actually the point that I was trying to make, that the main added value of cleanups is the power to change attitudes, the power to change mentality of people. And we hear many times people saying that, you know, once they join the cleanup, they cannot see a beach with the same eyes as they used to do. So we fully agree with your point, and raising awareness is a big part of the solution. So just the idea here is to understand, the same as fishing for litter activities, that the added value lies more into changing attitudes and behaviors, and not in the actual amount of removed plastics. And this also for those of you who on board today are communication officers and journalists, and many times when we perform a cleanup, they come and ask about numbers, you know, how much did you remove? This is not the question to ask. It's more the question, how many people participated in this action? So how many people potentially will change their approach? And coming to fisheries and aquaculture, so they are productive activities, yes. Yeah, they produce a lot of marine litter, true, but also they are impacted. Yes, this is true. And in fact, within the same project that Katerina was referring, we assessed how much financially wise or time-wise spent on cleaning are fisheries and aquaculture impacted, and the cost is substantial. So when we talk about economic marine litter impact, we should take into consideration these two sectors. Yes, we do, as we do also for the tourism, as we do also for the local authorities, and this is precisely what we use as an argument to convince the fisheries and aquaculture sectors to join delittering efforts simply because it's for their own best interest. Katerina, I don't know, would you like to comment a little bit on this point as well?
Yes, I think you are right. As I saw in my presentation, there was impact, of course, in fisheries, but also there is fisheries on the catch, because presence of litter in the catch, of course, reduce the time of fishing, the effort, the cost, and provide high, lower quality catches.
Just something that I would like to add on Katerina's presentation, I had forgotten previously. At the European level, there is a lot of discussion and debate, the so-called derelict fishing gear schemes, and how to make them more efficient, how to ensure that they are used by all fisheries and aquaculture facilities. You know, it's a very complicated topic, simply because Katerina stated this clearly in her initial slides, that fishing gear are made by many different materials. Okay, so they require, in order to be treated, in order to be ideally mechanically recycled, they need to be separated. Okay, and for example, one net, even myself, I didn't know that in the past, but one net may be made from 3 different types of polymers. You know, another for the actual netting, another polymer around for framing this net, another polymer for having some kind of rope to pull this net, and so on and so forth. So then dismantling these nets into the different polymer materials, it's very challenging, because, for example, the fisherman doesn't know, you know, it's not easy to recognize what kind of polymers we have to do the sorting himself. Who will do the sorting? At the facilities? This is a tremendous and very expensive task. Who will bear the cost of this task? Which facilities can recycle the different parts of these nets? So it's very complicated, and this is why at European level there is a lot of discussion, first of all, to develop standards for fishing nets. So each fishing net for each purpose should be made from a certain material. Then discussions were about color coding nets, so fishermen can easily understand that yellow, I don't know, is polypropylene, and another color is another synthetic polymer, so they can easily dismantle the nets. Talking about extended producer responsibility, so the one who sells the nets to be the same way as, for example, when you buy a refrigerator, that the company that sold the refrigerator has to take the packaging of the refrigerator, the same way the companies that sell the nets to be responsible for collecting these nets back and sending them back to the actual producers for recycling. But all of this is very complicated, and still we are not yet there to give. So that's why we are more experimenting through different projects how to actually do that. It's still limited in scale, but this is definitely the direction that we will move on in the near future. So now I see from ACAB Scuba Diving Association that awareness is very important, and the first step is to start with schools, universities, and awareness on social media. Yes, we fully agree on that. And I might add, doing awareness responsibly without disseminating inaccuracies that will have a boomerang effect at the end of the day. Then, okay, I see another comment. Aquaculture and fishing gear are often a problem in many countries. Could a labeling on the gear, for example, putting the name of the fishing or aquaculture company into a buoy or net, help recover, find responsible, the reduced costs of processing by involving the responsible company, and potentially reduce cost gear by punishing the involved company? Well, in fact, gear tagging is something that has been implemented. Tagging not the company who produced it, tagging the owner of the net, because in fact, we have done a Mediterranean-wide survey in order to see how fishing nets are discarded in the Mediterranean. And I was personally surprised when many fishermen admitted that they discard them when at the end of their use, because there is no special management scheme in place, or they had to pay for discarding them. They were discarding them at sea in the so-called, I call them sea fields, you know, in comparison to landfills. So tagging, first of all, the fisherman or the fisheries company or aquaculture company could be a solution. But also then what happens to accidental loss of fishing gear, you know, how to put someone, because a lot of gear, first of all, gear has value to the people, okay, unless they are overused and they should be discarded. So a lot of fishing gear gets also lost accidentally due to very bad weather conditions. So it's the tagging approach and penalizing, giving penalties for losing gear is a little bit problematic, but for sure it has been tested in the Mediterranean and worldwide in order to, as a way to prevent anyway. I don't know, Katerina, would you like to say something about the tagging? Have you in HCMR tried out this approach?
Actually, trying something to change in the fishing net, for example, the material or even something very small, it's complicated, and there are several studies for selectivity, because a small change can act the behavior of fishing and has we can have very huge or another impact. So there are to be implemented a lot of studies before make a suggestion or a proposal so easy, so so fast. Several studies will be done in this sector.
Thank you, Katerina. Now I see we have another comment. Why is it difficult to recycle marine plastics is mainly due to high level of water and salt present in the litter waste. Actually, is mainly because of organic matter, first of all, and sand, but also because a lot of the litter items that are exposed to the sun and to the different weather conditions are already degraded. So they have lost a lot of, they are deteriorated. So then if you apply recycling to these plastics, you're gonna receive material that is of low quality, that nobody will want to, because it will not have the properties of plastics, you know. So what can you do with it? Plus they cause problems to the recycling process per se. So this is why marine plastics cannot be easily recycled. Yes, if we talk about, I don't know, let's say, you know, all these projects that where children go and collect only plastic cups, you know, that are super clean, or they wash them, they can be recycled, and they're not old, they would, you know, freshly deposited on the beach. Yes, or but in general, if you see the kind of litter items that we collect when we do beach litter monitoring or cleanup operations, you know, who will sort this, who will wash this, and who will take out all the weather plastics or those that cannot be cleaned sufficiently. This is precisely why it's so difficult. What do you think about the role of legislation at regional level regarding ghost gears? Well, obviously, legislation in every topic related to marine litter has a key role to play. And there is actually foreseen by the regional plan for marine litter management in the Mediterranean, there is an objective to minimize the loss of ghost gear, the loss of gear that ends up as ghost gear, through improving practices on board. And I think Carlo will also talk about this during his presentation. Then, yes, whoever wants to share something, you can use this chat and share links to any interesting materials for the rest of the participants. And there is a question in French, which I will leave it for later because I will have to translate it. I'm not a French speaker, but we will come back to this question. And then, in fact, the advanced exhaust filtration tower should eliminate the emissions as cement emissions are less than plastic incineration emissions. I mean the filtration system preventing emissions of particles, the tiny plastic particles that have no capabilities of safe. As unfortunately, I'm not an expert on incineration of plastics, but for sure, it is a very challenging topic, not just for me, but in general. And as I said, the pollution generated by the incineration of plastics is one aspect. It's a much more complicated topic with implications for different sectors. I think the use of plastic is unavoidable, but the solution, in my opinion, is to reason its use. Yes, we fully agree with you that, and this is what we call the wise use of plastics. With any material, it's the same that if somebody gives you a knife, you can cut with his knife something, and it's a useful tool, but you can cut yourself as well if you don't use it properly. So, okay, it sounds a little bit humoristic, but this is more or less the same with plastics. Thank you for your answer. Okay, I talked about the expensive cost of recycling. Okay, it's about how expensive recycling is. Yes, there are costs involved. It's not super expensive, but it is more like it requires a reorganization of society to collect the plastics, to take them to the place that it should be recycled, and so on and so forth. There is no other way if we want to keep this material in the circular economy loop. All right, so these were more or less the comments received, and at this, I hope we answered as much as possible to your questions, and feel free to contact us. We will share also the emails of the speakers, so if you have any specific questions after the webinar, that you can contact them. And at this stage, I would like to thank Katerina again and pass the floor to Carlo. Carlo, welcome on board.
Hello, hello, all of you. And it's a pleasure to be back with the team. I was part of the previous project regarding the marine protected areas, and my participation of Miramare MPA was an event which was foreseen within MPA Plastic Busters, and we developed an activity with mussel farmers. Let me share my screen. Okay, I suppose it is working.
Yes, all good.
Okay. Well, at first, why mussel farming? In the point of view of Miramare MPA and WWF Italy, mussel farming is the most sustainable way of breeding marine species. I mean, they do not require feeding, they do not use antibiotics, and they follow the nature schemes and cycles. So it is an activity which has less impact than any other breeding activity and aquaculture at sea. Moreover, it uses very low gasoline, as most of the plants are located right in front of the ports in which the boats are normally landed. Just to give you a clue of where we are working in the Northern Adriatic Sea, close to Venice. Trieste is just at the border with Slovenia. And Miramare is a small MPA which was started in 1973 by WWF, and nowadays it works under the Ministry of Environment. It is part of the network of national Italian MPAs, which encompasses some 30 MPAs. It is also part of the biosphere reserve schemes of UNESCO, starting from 1978. This is more or less the point of view of Miramare coast, and on the right side there is the town of Trieste, on the left side the town of Monfalcone, and then the low sandy shore of Adriatic Italian coast, while on the right side you have the rocky coast of Slovenia and Croatia area. It is a little bit of a kind of turning point. And this sea hosts several plants and companies performing mussel farming. This is the view of the work on the boats which are providing this kind of activity. And most of the work is done with tubular nets, and our concern is coming at the end of the cycle of farming, when the bits of these tubular nets come to be washed ashore. This is an image we all are very aware of, but this is the situation we find within our seas. Sea horses being grabbed by the mussel nets. And these photos become even part of small calendars circulating in Italy. And it is, well, a kind of recognition of a problem which is linked to this activity. On one side, we very welcome this kind of farming of aquaculture. On the other side, we recognize the impact they have. And so the first part of the work we have developed is the mapping of the debris generated by aquaculture, by mussel farming all along the seafloor. We have performed a scuba survey, photo survey, and I don't know if you can clearly see on this photo the layer of tubular nets on the sea bottom, but they are almost a continuous. They are continuously present below the mussel plants, and we also have the wrecks of the buoyancies, of the buoys, which are no longer used. They are cut and sunk instead of being properly disposed on land. So again, on one hand, we have an aquaculture activity which is considered sustainable. On the other hand, we have some education activity and sensitization activity which has to be performed towards the mussel farm. And we came to map the debris. On this map, you see the red dots are all the mussel plants located in the Gulf of Trieste. Miramare is this spot, and so we went diving all along these areas, and then we mapped the density of the debris in order to have an idea of where to go at first, cleaning them once the activity of cleaning and will be authorized. It is not a simple activity, as it has also to be, we have to consider also the fact of resuspending sediment, marine sediment, together with the removal of objects and nets. So at first we map in order to know exactly where we have the debris, and then we can start thinking about eventually removing them once we will clearly understand what if removing is better than letting it laying down on the seafloor and be covered a long time with other sediment. The other activity we did perform is the education of collecting the nets, the tubular nets and the bits of these tubular nets directly on board of the vessels. So we found a way to build some beans, which you see they are used to be wrapped by a tubular net again, and in these beans we dispose every cuts and piece of net, and they are disposed within the beans, and afterwards we remove the cylinder, and we get the packaging of all the unsorted material and pieces of nets, which go directly to waste instead of being thrown at sea. The most relevant activity in my point of view is testing the natural fibers instead of plastic nets. And we started an activity with using cords and nets made of natural fibers. We tested several materials, agave especially, but also other nets made of several different type of fibers. And we had some preliminary results depending on the time these vegetal fibers are left at sea. The durability is longer with fibers being more resistant, more having a higher content of lignina. But on the other hand, these fibers are difficult to be handled by hand directly, to be worked by hand. The most useful fiber is cotton, but it is the less resistant. So we have to balance the durability with the easy way of working these fibers. But the very first result is that the due mixing of natural fibers can lead to a net which is useful to be left at sea for at least 1 year, which is the timing needed for the mussels to grow up to the due stage and being sold on the market. Presently, we are working on, we are preparing a proposal of projects for having the machines on board of the vessels be converted to work with natural fibers, which is the step after the testing. Well, in this picture, you see the way we perform it. We have a central piece of cord all along the inside, in the center of the net, and then we have a cotton net or other materials wrapping the tubular net. This is the way, the best way from our point of view to use the vegetable fibers, having a central cord, more resistant, and then an external net made of natural fibers. This is a net used for collecting the juveniles. It is left at sea, and then the juveniles grow on it, and then they are collected and transferred to the cylinder, to the tubular nets. Another activity we have started, it is the cleaning up of unproductive plants. This happens after the events of toxic plankton, which appear from time to time. Then the activity is stopped due to the presence of toxic plankton, which is the toxins then are transferred to the muscles. The activity is suspended after the exams provided by the veterinarians. What happens is that the mussel farmers do not longer go at sea during this timing. The closure period can last from 2 to 3 months, and whatever grows on the nets and on the rows is no longer collected, and we have an unproductive plant where the debris can are left at sea and can navigate. Then this can be lost at sea and navigate in the water. So together with the mussel farmers, we proceeded to cleaning up these unproductive plants. You see here some mussels being left after the closing event, after the presence of toxic plankton. And again, we performed the collection and the cleaning up of all the plastic debris, the plastic tubular nets being left on these unproductive plants. And what we return is a plant being again available for the new cycle. At last, what we have performed in this project is an awareness activity within Miramare premises for education. This is our site within Miramare MPA, and we performed for the school children a simple analysis of what is the content of microplastic within the salt used in kitchen. If you can see on this box, this is salt produced by Mediterranean water, seawater, and refined. This is a box of 1 kilo salt, normally available on the market, on the supermarket. What we do, we dilute part of the salt within normal water, demineralize the water at 60 degrees. We dilute the solution, and then we pump it through a filtering ramp. This is the procedure, and what we get is from 1.6 to 8 pieces of microplastic per gram of salt. And this is what the children discover on a normal microscope, stereo microscope, discovering how much microplastic is embedded in the normal kitchen salt. Well, this is to educate and to understand how this kind of problem is present at every level of our lifestyle. Well, that's it from my part. That's all.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you very, very much for this interesting experiment that you have been conducting and for this very nice presentation. I see that we have a comment and actually a question. So it is, how does aquaculture gear made from natural fibers different from plastic in terms of degradation in case of loss? And also in terms of management costs? A difficult question.
No. It is the question every producer directly asks. It is the very common question. Well, in fact, it is much more expensive. Plastic is very performing material, very performing. It is durable. Its cost is very low, and what we need to do it is to understand that we have to change attitude definitively. In fact, mussels are a very low cost meal. Well, even if it costs €1 per kilo more, it will not turn a consumer away from this meal, from the mussels. They will cost a little bit more, but we will have a much more healthy product, and we will contribute to overcome this situation.
Sorry, I was muted apparently. Okay. No, I was just saying that from this experiment, this unique experiment that you have been conducting, exploring the possibility of changing material out of which these mussel nets are being made, it has a lot of lessons learned. First of all, it illustrates that, talking about replacing plastics with something else is not so. Yeah, it's easier to say than actually doing it, in the sense that we ended up using plastic, for example, in mushroom farming, for a reason. It didn't just happen. The reason is that this material is cheap. The reason is that this material can create any sorts of shapes and forms. The reason is that the mussels grow well in this material, and so on and so forth. So now trying to figure out what other material we could use in order to go back to a more sort of traditional approach, but to have the same performance, and even, and a better environmental performance. As you can see, it is challenging. So now, natural fibers, yes, in terms of degradation, unless they are coated with something, okay, I believe that they degrade much easier than plastic, for sure. Okay, so this is the added value on the one side. Then we don't have perhaps contamination of mussels with plastic particles that come from the degradation of plastics. Okay, now management costs at the end of the life cycle of the natural fibers. This I'm not familiar with, and I don't know, Carlo, if you, because Carlo is now more in the phase of testing this material. I don't know if you have been focusing on the end of life of this material and what could be done with it.
Well, in fact, what we notice is it disappears easily at sea. Mm-hmm. In fact, our concern was the durability instead.
Yeah, it's interesting.
We are looking for a material which resists at sea before disappearing, disappearing. So, by the way, we have to resolve the problem of durability at first. Then we have to find a machine, and maybe we found something in Spain which is already working with cotton net, providing long cylinders instead of the vertical one. They use another layout, which and this could lead our farmers to convert their plants and no longer use the vertical cylinders, but use a kind of worm wrapped all around the horizontal lines, kind of DNA spiral of this long net being laid down in an horizontal way instead of the vertical one. This machine is already working. It is produced in Spain, and we will test it. Presently, they work with an external net made of vegetable fiber, but they have a central core which is polyethylene. We will try to understand if we can replace the whole material in the inner rope and the external net being made all of vegetable fibers. This will be our attempt. And then at the end of the cycle, well, this goes directly to incinerator. We have an incinerator which already works with these with the plastics, and it is one of the kind of reducing the dioxin and being able to capture all the chemicals. It is very well performing, and presently we are proud of this incinerator working the way it is asked to work.
Obviously at a rather small scale, of course.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Then there was a question by Ahmed. If you have any data on the number and weight of plastic waste produced by selfish farming in Italy, just to give them an example.
I can tell you about the province in which we live, because I know how much is brought to the incinerator. It is 3.5 tons per year of plastics. And it is more or less the size of the map you have seen with the red lines indicating the layout of the farmers. This is for the production of a whole year.
Just to tell you, Ahmed, I don't have a figure now at the top of my head, but we could find a figure. But from the research point of view, just to tell you that the mussel nets in Italy and in Greece in some areas, it is one of the top 3 litter items found in beach litter surveys. And for example, in Greece, in the main location for mussel farms is in the north, in a gulf that is called Thomais Gulf. And just to tell you, because we also implemented their pilot activity within the Plasticbusters MPA's scope, that the seafloor is totally invisible because it's covered by mussel nets, and the coastline, there is no coastline. There are tons and tons of layered mussel nets from years and years, accumulating simply on the one side, obviously, because they are from weather phenomena getting accidentally released, but also because the mussel farmers, since there is no treatment management scheme in place, they just take the content, the mussels, and they throw them off the vessel at sea for years and years. So maybe for some of the countries, I know that not all countries of the Mediterranean have mussel farming, but for some countries that are big mussel producers, this is a huge, massive problem. Now, I see one question from Abir. Perhaps it's related to the Tuesday's topic about identification of particles that less than 1 millimeter. I think that this is a good question to send to Dario. And then in MED, selfish farming are not among the polluting activities regarding marine litter and other pollutants. The management of this activity in small scale is very practical. Well, Ahmed, in some countries of the Mediterranean, this is a huge problem, as I said, but not for all, because not all countries are producing mussels. But I think apart from Greece and Italy, I don't remember which other country is France is producing, which are the Spain. And it's a problem that may affect, neighboring countries as well. If the salt is affected by one, so very interesting conference. If the salt is infected with plastic, then the mussels are a lot because they are filter feeders and we often eat them. It's unfortunate how ignorant and irresponsible we are. This is for sure. It's very unfortunate.
And consider that when you eat mussels, you eat everything inside, including digestive glands, and which is a different thing than eating fish. You eat only the muscle, the muscular part of the fish, while when you eat mussels, you eat everything and what is in the belly of the of the mussel too, with the content of plastics, which is higher in the digestive gland than not in the muscular part.
But if we can say something for mussels, okay, indeed, they filter and they ingest plastics, but also they accept them, okay? Unlike some chemicals that they might not do so efficiently.
They do not accumulate.
So, not all is black, okay? There is still hope. In selfish farming, do the natural fibers tested have the same yields as those made of plastics, same strength and retention capacity compared to those in plastics?
We have to work around this point, and this is why we made a layout with a central rope, which is providing the holding capacity of the weight. Consider that one vertical cylindrical net weighs some 60 kilos normally, and it has to last at sea for 1 year and facing all the waves and continuous moving with the ripples and the waves. So the most delicate part is the upper ending of the rope and the way it is knotted on the horizontal rope. This is the most critical point. So the work is to consider the right way to suspend the vertical net, the cylindrical net, to the horizontal rope with the central rope, and then providing an envelope of vegetable fiber which lasts at sea at least the time needed for the mussels to build the byssus and then being able to hold themselves on the central rope.
Thank you, Carlo. And I think that we can wrap up the session. There is also a comment about, because mussels are filter feeders, are there studies on the accumulation of microplastics and their impact on consumers? In fact, this is what we were discussing on Tuesday, that mussels are being used in many studies related to not necessarily bioaccumulation of microplastics, but on ingestion of microplastics and to which extent these microplastics impact their health in the first place. Now, as I said, the impact on consumers is we were discussing this also on Tuesday. It's much more difficult because mussels are not the only source of microplastics. The biggest amount of microplastics that enters our system is from inhalation. Every day, the synthetic things that we're wearing, the dust that is around us. So now, dedicated studies to see how mussels impact consumers, this is much more challenging and there are some studies trying to connect this, but still this is largely under research. So, and the last word of the day, my recommendation would be to read this report from the World Health Organization, Dietary and Inhalation, Exposure to Nano and Microplastic Particles and Potential Implications for Human Health. Thank you, Christoph. We will do that. And if you could also here share the link of this report, it would be very interesting to share it with the rest of the participants of today's session. So now, unfortunately, we have to move on, even though this session was really interesting. So thank you, Carlo. Katerina has already left us. We will move on to the part where we will be discussing the, let me share my screen, the land-based sources of marine litter. And hopefully you are seeing my screen. Okay. So, and by land-based sources, we refer to poor waste management practices, industrial outfalls, the charges of untreated municipal sewage, and tourism and recreational activities. And of course, there is a wide range of measures to address this kind of sources, among which setting up a single-use plastics-free network of coastal and food and beverage outlets, setting up the Adopt a Beach scheme, which is more of a participatory science and awareness-raising activity. Developing, in general, awareness-raising activities are key for sea-based and land-based sources of marine litter, and some of them can be can be more general on the topic of plastic pollution. Others can be more dedicated, as for example, having a dedicated campaign for cigarette butts on beaches. Also, other measures refer to improving waste management practices, setting a reusable cup delivery system for beach bars, and developing a network of collection points for food and beverage containers, which is something that we will be hearing later on from Gloria. So now I will try in the next 20 minutes or so to present you with the methodological approach to operationalize, oops, sorry, a wrong presentation, to operationalize two selected measures that we tested and replicated within the Plastic Busters MPA's initiative. And these are focusing on single-use plastics. The reasoning for that is because the majority of litter items found on Mediterranean beaches, the same as in European beaches and in most parts of the world, are single-use plastics. And here you can actually see that 50%, in fact, of the litter items found on beach litter surveys, this comes from more than 3,500 surveys conducted in 2016 at European regional seas, are single-use plastics. And these single-use plastics include, as I already mentioned earlier, also fishing gear. So, and even marine protected areas are not untouched by this problem of plastic pollution. And on this graph, you can see, though, the variation in terms of the single-use plastics, the amount of single-use plastics found on the coastal areas, protected areas. In some cases, we have very high amount of single-use plastics deposited on the coastline, almost 80%. But in some other areas, this was around 11%. And this has to do exactly with what I was saying earlier, that this depends on the type of activities taking place in these areas. And the featured measures within this presentation are related, on the one hand, creating a single-use plastics-free network of coastal businesses dealing with the food and beverages, and also on setting up a reusable cup delivery system for beach bars. And we will come back to that with more details. So these measures targeted, the items that they mainly targeted were shopping bags, cutlery, straws, food and beverage containers, cup and cup lids, plates and stirrers made of plastic. And regarding the first measure, this is a measure you can see it taking place in different shapes and forms and modalities, but the main aim of this measure is to promote best practices within the tourism and recreation sector with regard to reducing significantly or even phasing out the single-use plastics they use. And the way we operationalize it was that this was done in a voluntary, with a voluntary sort of a setup where businesses voluntarily registered and committed them to a network and committed themselves to comply with a set of good environmental practices related to prevention, reduction, reuse, and recycling of plastic waste, with special emphasis on soups. And these are the different methodological steps involved. So, of course, obviously, we need somebody who can coordinate the scheme, and this person should have certain skills. Then the development of communication and outreach materials and supporting materials for this action, then actually reaching out to the different hotel, restaurant, and catering businesses, the so-called HoReCa, and signing the commitment to join this network. Then the next phase is to carry out an audit on the use of soups, and we will come back to that, how this is done, defining reduction targets and the measures to achieve them, implementing those measures, which of course in some cases requires also to train the staff of the business, monitoring and evaluation of the progress achieved, and eventually, when the targets are set, to award the certificate and continuously monitor the progress of this business and its compliance with its commitments and targets set. So in this kind of measure, the main stakeholders are the owners and the staff of coastal food and beverage outlets, meaning hotels, restaurants, cafes, snack bars, canteens, located on the coastline. But obviously this can be implemented also for businesses that are not located in the coastline, but one way or the other, whatever is generated contributes A, to the problem of waste, and B, it could also find other pathways to come to the coastal and marine environment. But here we focused on coastal businesses. Then tourist operators, tourist service providers, any kind of tourism business, local authorities, because they can act as potential promoters and multipliers of this kind of measure. Environmental NGOs, similarly, they can be promoters, and of course the media. The most integral part of this process was to carry out the audit on the use of soups. This is a straightforward task, but it requires some level of organization in order to dig deeper into the different practices of the business and understand how much single-use plastics are being used by the business in terms of items and in terms of weight, what kind of single-use plastics are being used in their daily operations, and then how these items are being treated. And of course, this kind of information might be more accessible for bigger businesses like large hotels or very large restaurants, but for small businesses like a small canteen on the beach, this kind of information was not always available. And of course, there had to be some kind of estimations in order to have a sort of a baseline, and in order then to move on to designing the intervention. So, and of course, complementary information is always necessary in order to interpret results like the type of business, the scale of business, the number of employees, the average numbers of customers, and so on and so forth. And once this audit is in place, then through a participatory process, so in close collaboration with the business itself or the businessman, the reduction targets need to be defined. So how far can or does the businessman wish to go in terms of reducing these items used? I don't know, a reduction target could be 50%, 70%, you know, maybe they decide that they want to have, they want to gradually reach larger targets. So for the beginning, they would like, for example, to set the target of 30%. So this is totally up to the business, how far they wish to go. And then together to understand what are the options to go to reaching this target, and at the end of the day to select the most appropriate ones. So basically, in order to reach the ultimate business transformation plan, these are the kind of steps that need to be undertaken. So one is to identify the options, the alternatives, the measures that should be implemented, to examine these options one by one. Then considering these options to set up the reduction targets, then in relation to these targets to prioritize the options, which ones, let's say, are most probable to be implemented, and finally to select those options, those measures that will be part of the business transformation plan. And this prioritization of measures leading to the ultimate selection requires to always keep in mind the waste hierarchy. So at the top of this hierarchy is the elimination. And we will, in the next slides, see what that means. So phasing out of single-use plastics, the reuse, the reduction, the replacement with sustainable or more sustainable alternatives, and or replacing for enhanced recyclability, or improving recycling. And this figure here is it's fundamental, because initially, at least in Europe, when the SUPS directive entered into force, everybody started talking about, I don't know, replacing some single-use plastics with other ones, like we talked about it earlier on, with biodegradable ones. You see here, sorry, can you please mute yourself? So, as you see here, the replacement of the replacement option is comes fourth, as you can see here in the waste hierarchy. So replacing something, a single-use plastic item, is not the first thought that we should be having when we commit ourselves to a SUPS-free network. So now, in addition to this prioritization in terms of their environmental performance, other aspects related to the prioritization is the strategic impact, how this will actually impact the business at all levels, okay? Because maybe, for example, I don't know, deciding to stop using plastic straws might not, at the end of the day, if very few straws are being used in the business, lead to a massive impact, but maybe it will have more of a strategic impact in the sense that it shows to the customers that attention is placed to this item, which in fact has become some kind of a flagship item for minimizing plastic pollution. And many times people ask me, why are plastic straws so dangerous or so important? And the answer is that plastic straws is not necessarily the most dangerous plastic item on planet Earth, okay? I can think of many others with that exert much more negative effects, for example, on marine species. Even though, indeed, the plastic straw is relatively small, it can be taken by the winds, it can reach perhaps marine species easily, it is difficult to hold it in the sense that, you know, once it's taken by the wind, it's quite hard. It's not so big to be easily collected. But the reason why this item was selected is because it illustrates a little bit our habits. And we are using excessively straws, okay? And it's really not necessary unless we have some health issue and we cannot drink from the bottle or we cannot drink from a cup. In reality, it is not really a necessary item to use, and we could really live without straws. So this is why it was chosen as an item. Plus, plastic straws, for example, have implications also in terms of recycling, because in some countries where the recycling process is not so developed, they clog the different nets that are used for the sorting separation of litter items. So this is the reasoning behind using this as a flagship item. Now, coming back to the prioritization of measures, obviously economic implications, for example, if we choose to replace an item with something else that has a greater environmental performance, it might be more expensive. This is precisely why my advice to all the businesses out there is to simply choose the option of using less material instead of going for alternatives that might be more expensive. Then the environmental impact should be considered, in the sense that it doesn't make any sense to remove one single-use plastic item from the business and introduce something else that has equal or even greater environmental impact. And lastly, there are health and safety implications. For example, you will see later on that when we work at the coastline, in many countries, the option of handing over coffee, even in Greece, this is the case, in a glass, for example, in a canteen by the beach, is considered as a risk, because this glass might break, and then this might pose a threat for the safety of the beachgoers. So in many countries, in beach bars, it's not allowed to hand over glasses with beverages and drinks on the beach. So another option should be then found to replace the single-use plastic cup. And here are some examples referring either to the reduction or the elimination. So, for example, let's assume that we are working with a business that is using bottled water, and there are different options. Let's say that tap water is not an option for some reason, because it's not accessible, because it is not of good quality. It could be used, the water could be handed over in bulk form, like here we have, like in a business, instead of giving small bottles. And this way we reduce the amount of water containers used. So this is a reduction measure. Or we could simply replace the plastic bottle with refillable glass bottles. And this could be the elimination of the plastic material use in total, or to hand over glass bottles. But of course, as I said, in some cases, this is not possible for several reasons, plus the weight of the glass bottles and so on and so forth. It might create complications depending on the type of business. If we're talking about a restaurant, obviously, maybe this is not a problem to hand over water in glass bottles instead of plastic bottles. And then when it comes to straws, as I said, initially a lot of businesses moved to replacing straws with biodegradable straws, plastic biodegradable straws, and we discussed why this is not an optimal solution. Then a lot of businesses have moved to paper straws, which can be of a lesser environmental impact, assuming that it's not coated with plastics, but also paper straws have drawbacks, or actual straws. But from my point of view, the best way to reach the target of minimizing soups is to simply not hand out straws, and we can easily enjoy our drinks and beverages without a straw. And the same applies for stirrers. It's just visual, it's for decoration, but the impact that they are creating can be huge. So phasing out plastic stirrers and using, for example, metallic ones that can be reused could be an option, or using, for example, some food ingredients like cinnamon sticks could be another option. I'm just giving you some examples to see what kind of options we explored with the different businesses. And when it comes to the coffee cup, obviously moving on from the plastic cup to either a paper cup, or asking the customers not to take the lid of the cup, so this way to minimize the amount of waste produced, or encouraging customers to bring their own reusable cup, which more and more we see that happening, at least in the European Mediterranean countries, that a lot of people go and pick up their coffee with their own personal reusable cup. And so basically this was more or less the process and the options explored with the businesses one-to-one. And here actually you can see the first business that received the Plastic-Busters certificate. And in one Slovenian site. But obviously there were challenges encountered, and the challenges, as I said, not always it was easy to identify proper alternatives with low cost and high environmental performance, because also many products out there that claim to be more environmental friendly. This is just a claim. Nobody has proven that this claim is actually met. And this is precisely why, in many occasions, my advice to the businesses was to simply stop using certain items without replacing them with other ones. This is the most straightforward way. Of course, they were then worried if they would stop, I don't know, handing out straws and stirrers, or if they would stop giving plastic bags and they would hand them over upon request. They were afraid that maybe they will use customers. And this is a very valid concern, because these are small businesses. But, and this is also where awareness raising, because all these kind of measures cannot just work on their own. They need complementary activities, and they need to be supported by awareness raising where people really understand the added value of minimizing soups, and then they reward these businesses that take action towards this direction, and they visit them, they get their products from these businesses, and so on and so forth. And actually, I have to say that even the most worried businesses, once the measure was put in place, they came back and they were surprised. They were telling us that they were surprised how well appreciated this kind of initiative was by their customers. There were a lot of questions. Towards that end, of course, appropriate labeling, posters, explaining why they're not handing over straws and stirrers and so on and so forth is necessary. But also another important problem sometimes is when the proper timing for working with these businesses, because in the Mediterranean, a lot of these businesses, are small. So it's one or two people, it's family business, okay, which means that they have to do everything. So now also working on implementing measures for minimizing soups, maybe it may seem at the beginning something extra to do and they don't have time, but we convince them that this brings added value to their work, but also when to approach them, because these businesses, they're seasonal. So they are open during the, I don't know, they start working by the end of spring and during the summertime. So when to approach them? This was a problem because they're very busy and they don't have time during the peak season to work on this. But somehow, when considering that, in the design phase, there are ways and options to address it. So this was just one of the showcases of measures dealing with this. And then the second one focused on establishing a reusable cup delivery system for beach bars. This, in fact, was sort of inspired by a pioneer initiative that had taken place in Munich, not in Munich, sorry, in Freiburg, in Germany, where an entire city has transformed the coffee-to-go bars, and people can take their coffee in a reusable cup, once they complete the use of this reusable cup, they can either go back to the same coffee bar and give this cup back and take a new coffee with another usable cup, or they can simply give it back to this business and take a deposit that they gave back, or any other business that it's part of this scheme. And it may sound difficult, but they managed. It is a small city, I think, of 500,000 inhabitants. They managed to put it into effect, and it really worked. And this was the source of inspiration for doing something similar in Spain, in the protected area of Del Tebre, where basically the idea was to promote the use of reusable cup in beach bars and festivals taking place on the coast within the protected area. And the overall idea was to distribute and use a reusable cup, and the businesses would sell drinks in this cup, and then the customer will have to give a deposit. And once the cup was the use of the cup was completed, then the customer would go back to the business and receive the initial deposit back. It sounds simple, and but it was not, of course. Nothing is so simple. And then later on, you will hear also from Gloria a very interesting story of another similar measure that they tried to implement. But coming back to this one, the objectives of the measures are A, to reduce the number of single-use cups used and discarded at beach bars and festivals that could potentially become marine litter. Then to reduce the cost of cleanup operations, because in this MPA, a lot of time and resources were spent cleaning the coastline after the tourist period or after festivals. Also, it was a very effective tool to enhance awareness of local communities and visitors on the issues related to plastic pollution. And also this measure can ultimately contribute to reduction in the amount of raw plastic material inputted to the economy, simply because we are using and reusing the same item. And in some cases, it could be also economically profitable because there are savings made from the businesses, because they don't need to buy new single-use cups. They don't have waste management costs. And also in some cases, the customers, because the cup was beautiful, they kept it. And so the businesses kept the deposit given, so they made some kind of revenue from that. So the different steps to operationalizing now this CAP, A is to define the operational and logistics requirements, to engage with beach bar owners and festival organizers, to select the reusable cup, to set up a distribution and pickup scheme for the reusable cup, to set up the reusable cup washing service, and then to develop awareness raising and communication materials and assess the environmental and economic implications. So we will not go through all the steps, but the most tricky ones, in the sense that, first of all, regarding the operational and logistics of this cup, because one thing is, first of all, to select an appropriate cup. Okay, so basically, a consultation process needs to be set up where the different types of businesses can contribute to the identification of from what this cup should be made of. Could it be made of glass? Could it be made of plastic? Because we are on the beach and there are safety implications, plastic that is reusable. Then how this cup should be designed, in order maybe to look appealing for the customers, what kind of size, there are different, some businesses, for example, who, I don't know, you give espresso would like to have a very small cup, while some other businesses that they give, I don't know, juices, they would like to have a bigger cup. So we need to find what kind of size would be the optimum size, or whether we should have a couple of cups with different sizes. Then how long should the durability of this cup, because obviously if you select a better material of plastic, there are different types of plastics, then this cup can remain in the cycle for a longer period of time. before it cannot be used anymore because it's so worn out. But obviously, this kind of cup might be heavier or might be more expensive. So this is where also the cost of this cup plays a role in selecting the appropriate cup. And then at the end of the day, whether there is any environmental impact, and also how this cup will be obtained, because there is one way, obviously, to buy it. But in many countries, there is also an option to rent this. And together with the rental of this cup, it might be that the washing service is offered. So there are different modalities, and I'm just mentioning here these in order to give you an idea of the different options that are out there. Then someone needs to map all regulatory requirements in place that are also linked to the deposit value for setting this cap system. So, for example, there might be taxation or invoicing issues. We had this example here in Greece, in Corfu. It was very difficult to apply a deposit scheme, because when the customer comes and takes the beverage and takes the cup, for this, let's say, €1 of deposit, the businessman must give a receipt. But if he gives a receipt, he might be taxed. And there was no regulatory provision on how to deal with this kind of problem. In the end, they managed to get an exempt from the taxation office, but only for the scope of the project. But this is why here legislation plays a key role in designing the necessary legislative regime for accommodating this kind of schemes. Then we need to define the number of reusable cups required in order to make sure that the needs of all the businesses are covered. And another thing is to identify how this will be distributed, who will distribute it. Okay, there has to be distribution points set up, and also these points need to be different from the points for health and safety reasons, from the locations where these cups will be picked up in order to be then transported for washing. Because, of course, in the city of Freiburg, it was easy. The cup was washed by the business because it's coffee or beverage businesses were big businesses where they have a washing machine, and it worked well. But on the beach, most of these canteens have even limited access to water. So the idea even of having a dishwasher is not applicable, it's not possible. So this is why, in the case of Deltebre and many other areas of the Mediterranean, this washing service has to be organized, and this reusable cups have to be picked up and taken for washing elsewhere. And so these are more or less the main aspects related to operational and related to logistics. And here I just wanted to give you the advantages and disadvantages of either purchasing the cup or using or renting the cup. So, for example, by renting the cup, you have a lower logistical requirements implied in the setup of the reusable cup, and all distribution and pickup logistics are provided by the service providers, and the cup washing service can be included in the rental option, as I already mentioned. But there is also the problem that there is no option to brand the reusable cup, so you cannot put your logo on it or the festival logo. In our case, we wanted to put the logo of the Deltebre protected area. And in case of non-returned cups, you lose the eventual economic revenue. But this is really minor in the grand scheme of things. If you purchase the reusable cup, then of course you have higher logistical requirements for setting the entire system. You need yourself, or I mean, at local scale, the distribution and pickup logistics need to be set up. Then the cup washing service most probably will have to be set up, but you can brand this reusable cup. And Also, you might have the possibility to reuse the same reusable cups over time, unlike in the when you rent this service. And these are colleagues actually in Deltebre that are drinking their drink in the cups produced by the management body of Deltebre. And the main challenges for them after the completion of the activity was selecting the right cup. They went for one type of cup, but as you can see, this is quite a big cup. So for example, in the case of certain beverages and drinks like, I don't know, an espresso coffee, maybe this, or children, this size of cup was not suitable. So they understood that they should have maybe one other option of a cup. Then the reusable cup washing service for them was very challenging. They explored the option of renting a dishwasher, they explored many options of providing dishwashers to these businesses. In the end, they managed to find a solution, but I'm just saying this because it might be the case in case you decide to implement something like that. They lost a lot of cups. And this was a problem because constantly they had to keep an audit of the cups they have in the process and bring new cups in place because some customers kept this as you know, for the memory of visiting this Deltebre Park, which is famous for having flamingos. And they still are not sure about the environmental implications in terms of the distribution of these cups and the CO2 emissions incurred, but they plan to use an environmentally friendly vehicle in order to distribute the cup and minimize also the CO2 emission from that end. So this was more or less an overview. And all this information and even more information you can find in the step-by-step guide that we have developed within the Plastic Buses MPAs project, but also on a report that provides many details about these examples that I presented you. And in fact, all of these are part of the e-learning module that is free of charge, and you can register yourself in this link. And all of these resources, together with many others, it's not an exhaustive list though, are part of the resource pack that I have shared with you together with the agenda of this webinar. So at this stage, I would like to close my presentation and invite Gloria from Cabo de Gata to, hi Gloria, and welcome, to share with you her experience from trying to implement another measure. So Gloria has been one of the most active people in terms of operationalizing measures within the Plastic Buses initiative, and we're always very excited to hear her story. So Gloria, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much for having me, Tommy, Cristina. So nice to see you again. It's been quite a long time since the last time. So I'm going to share my screen if it is possible. So tell me if you are seeing.
Yes,
everything?
we see it.
Okay. Okay. So I will tell you a little bit introduction because I assume that maybe some of you already know Cabo de Gata. If not, I'm going to tell you. What is Cabo de Gata? Cabo de Gata is a natural park, biosphere reserve, UNESCO Global Geopark, a special protection area of Mediterranean importance, a special place for birds, and so many other levels, international designations and things like that, that make it one of the most important protected areas of Spain and more or less of the region that is Andalusia. It's located in the very southeastern point of the Iberian Peninsula, which also gives the names to the area, that is the Cape of Gata, Cabo de Gata. It means that is the southeastern cape of the Iberian Peninsula, and his semi-arid conditions and volcanic landscape is is one of the main features of the area. It also made it one of the top destinations during the summertime for tourism. So it makes it tricky to balance conservation and tourism in some cases. The underwater ecosystems are also very, very well preserved, and scuba diving and snorkeling is one of the main attractions during the summertime. It's very important for the Posidonia Meadows, as any other areas of the Mediterranean, and the well-preserved outcomes of submarine volcanism in the cliffs near the coast that everybody wants to see, and is more or less the main picture that the Almeria province, where it's located, sells to the world. Cabo de Gata cliffs and Cabo de Gata beaches. So this is a big challenge, as you may imagine, because during the summertime it is measured more or less that sometimes we have 1 million visitors. So they are not all staying here because this is a very low populated area, but they pass somehow, maybe spending one day at the beach, and it is made tricky to manage all the waste that they could produce somehow. So the problem is that this is one of the most beautiful coves of Cabo de Gata. It's called Cala del Medio. You can only reach Cala del Medio by feet. You have to take a road that is, I think, 3.5 or 4 kilometers, or you can go by boat. So the problem is that everybody is very happy to go to the beach to have lunch and dinner, or maybe some time swimming or snorkeling, and they carry on the litter. But when you have finished and you have to go home, nobody wants to carry with you, and even more if you have to walk. And this is the case of many of the coves and the beaches that we have in Cabo de Gata. They are only accessible by feet. So this is a problem. So during the summer, you can see that on places, precise places, you can find all this amount of waste that is, as you can see, most part of them are bottles and glasses, plastic glasses, and things like that. So we have to establish a special plan for the summer to take the waste of the beaches. So we decided that through the Plastic Busters MPAs, even before, because this was a measure that it was planned at the beginning of the Act for Litter project, so we already have working with Tommy. We decided that maybe redirecting people and incentive people just to carry the litter with them, it could be a good solution in some places. And we thought about the reverse vending machines that they have in, for example, Germany, and it works quite well. It's a system that gives a reward. In Germany, for example, is with money. You put a matter and you gain money like that. Here in Spain, this is not allowed. So we have to give a price as an incentive, and we decided it could be something that we talk about it later. So I'm not going to say anything right now. So obviously, this is not a total solution. Of course, it's something that it requires a agreement with all the municipalities that implies the protected area. That is, there are 3, and it's difficult. You know, when you have different administrations and different organizations, it's very difficult to put everybody to reach an agreement. But maybe it's a part-time solution, and it could improve in some places like Cala del Medio, and other places like the beaches that are near San Jose. That is one of the biggest town here in Cabo de Gata protected area. So what we want? We want to involve the 3 municipalities first, because we thought at the beginning that if the 3 municipalities were involved, it will be easier. And if we didn't involve the 3, it will be something tricky, because some of them will think, oh, we are not counting on that on us, so we have to do something like that. We make a system that wanted to be useful and attractive, not only for the visitors, because sometimes here in the summer it seems that it's all focused on the tourists, but we also want the local residents to be part of the process, and also that the prices will be exchangeable for them, not only for the visitors. Through the prices, we want to encourage people to carry with them the litter and leave it on the machines instead of leaving on the beaches and just abandon them. So also, you know, make some noise, raise awareness, and give a little bit of light about the marine litter issue here in the MPA, because we also have a bigger problem, that is the agriculture that surround the natural park. Here is not allowed, but surrounding the natural park is all about under plastic agriculture. That is also another kind of problem. So our master plan, I have to differentiate these two things, our master plan and the come back to reality master plan, because we decided one thing and the reality hits us with another problem. So we wanted to, first step, find the reverse vending machine. And this was very, very difficult here in Spain. We thought that it was going to be easy, but here in Europe right now, no every country has a well-developed system, not even enterprises that made the reverse vending machines or rented or something. And it was like, you know, you never know when you make a piece of action, you never know that. But this was for us the most difficult step, because we cannot find reverse vending machines in an affordable price. It was everything very, very expensive and very tricky. The second step, it was to get the Natural Park Smart Businesses Association involved. It was very important because in the first stage, we thought that we can go, you know, door by door, talking to everyone, but it was very, very tricky and we have no time for that. So we decided that going to the Natural Park Small Business Association, that is here in San Jose, it will be easier because to them, they can talk to the members and make something like an intermediary. And the third step was to select the places and meet with all the stakeholders, and everyone was happy recycling, and all seemed easy, but it was not like that, I can assure you. So the reality was that we have to make a preliminary study to have a real picture of the problem and the MPA that showed a little light and face up with the truth that we have a big problem with plastics and bottles in the natural park. Also, we have to search for the reverse vending machine. As I told you, it was very, very expensive, so decided not to buy or rent because it was not possible. We found another reverse vending machines from another project, and thanks to Medways that make us an intermediary between that could be updated with a little bit updated of the software and things like that, and could be used. It was at the University of Barcelona, and they give us the machines, they put it there, and we have this. We have to launch a tender for the updates of the reverse vending machine because we cannot update the software. We launched another tender for the external consultants just to make the maintenance, also the controlling of the reverse vending machine and the proper functioning of the reverse vending machines. Lots of video calls with the Entrepreneurs Association to explain the project and reach an agreement. And finally, we reached an agreement that everybody was happy with. More video calls with the municipalities to get on board and to be part of the problems, also to make press release that it was very, very important just to people, for the people to know it, because here we are quite few people local living here, me included, but with a lot of people coming from Almeria city and things like that, we need the municipalities involved to make a press release, proper press release, to people to come to spend the day at the beach, maybe have an idea that they have some reverse vending machines, something like that. And also, finally, the reverse vending machine will finally sent to Cabo de Gata, and we established 3, one in each municipality, one in Carboneras Castle, that is managed by the municipality of Carboneras, one at the Amoladeras Visitor Centers, that is a visitor center for Natural Park, and one on the touristic information point, San Jose, that is the biggest city well, not city, town, a small town of the protected area. The final report are not to be made. That is, I'll all finish it. So the master plan more or less was as I told you, identification, the coordinator, assess the status of the waste management, the preliminary study that I told you about, the definition of the operational or logistical requirements, because it was not easy, it was not easy also to what to do with the bottles once you have it in the reverse vending machine. You fill a bag that is inside the reverse vending machine, and then what? Should I take it to the point? Should I share it with other ones? Should I put it on the container properly to be properly recycled? Should I store it somewhere or until I have a bigger quantity? So it seems like it's something like easy, but it is not. It depends on the laws that is in every country. And in our case, we cannot storage or accumulate the plastic bottles anywhere because it's not legal in Spain. You have to be a producer, a legal producer. So we decided with the municipalities that we are going to put it on the containers and of plastic containers and like that. And also the implementation and the reach of the stakeholders, the selection and installation of the reverting machine. As I told you, the development of the press release and the campaign, and dossier explaining and a report explaining the results and the impact. So finally, we have all these reverse vending machines. You can see it there are in the different places. The press release on local and regional print, digital press, and also in paper. And also we have this campaign that is in Spanish, but they say gain your discounts, taking your bottles back, something like that, and enforce about the different points and a QR where you can find information, the logos of the project and things like that, and the partners and stakeholders. So the system was like you take one bottle, you put it on the reverse vending machine, and you get a ticket. You can see it in one of the pictures there, and a ticket with a discount. We reached an agreement with the local stakeholders that the discount will be 10 cents of euro for every bottle. So they came to a network of partners that were kind to make this discount feasible in different activities. We have from scuba diving to kayaking to restaurants, supermarkets, and very diverse and beauty center. We have a little bit of everything because, as I told you, we wanted also to make it attractive for the local people, not only, you know, the scuba diving, kayaking, because otherwise it's not as good as we want it to be. And this is the results that we have by the end of October. The number of beverage containers, not only beverage container, also another type of bottles, but it was like where these, and we have 12 business involved. The bouchers that were used were only less than 2,000, but they have 7 months more to use it. So at the end of June, we'll know exactly. And the number of individuals, 96. I have to say that there were a lot of families with kids or something like that. They came maybe 5 or 6 people with different bottles. That it was amazing because the kids go and just put the bottle and they just, no, you have to recycle and things like that, and only count for one. So, you know, but it was like people go to the visitor centers just for leave the bottle, and it's one visitor center that is quite not isolated, I say, but you have to go there, you know, pass by, just going to the supermarket. It's in a very isolated place. And the main difficulties, as I told you, the main difficulties was to find a reverse vending machine. It was very difficult. We were almost at the point of not doing it and take the pilot action because we were really worried about finding a proper reverse vending machine that fits the the money that we have, and reaching the agreement with the small businesses, not tricky and not so difficult, but long, and you have to talk a lot of them, and they all want to participate because it's trendy, but not everybody in the same way. So it was difficult, but not so much, so not as difficult as the reverse vending machine quest. The maintenance and insurance issue, it seems like it's something with not importance, but you have to have the machines with insurance. Also, the last day of the insurance, a strong wind came and threw away one of the reverse vending machines. So thanks that we have an insurance, because you think that nothing is going to happen, but something happens, shit happens, like they say. Most of the problems appear before the reverse vending machines arrive to the MPA, because once we have the reverse vending machines and they were just functioning and able to the people together, it was all very, very easy. The problems were before with the reverse vending machines, with the entrepreneurs association, with the insurance, and it was things that after that it was just minimal things about maintenance and things like that. Lessons learned. Here you have you can see the picture, the ticket that you gave once you put the bottle there. And in Spain, right now, conclusion, it's very difficult to establish this kind of actions. The market is small. We found only 3 enterprises that send this or sold or rent these kind of machines, and they're very, very expensive. Not something for a small business to have or something like that. The problem with the litter and the management of this kind of waste is tricky. As I told you, it is not possible here in Spain to accumulate this kind of waste without being a producer, and it was like not the natural part is not a producer, and it was difficult. The involvement of local administrations and stakeholders in a proper way to sell the action is very, very important. You have to have them on your side, otherwise it's not going to work. And right now they are all very happy to be part of this initiative, so it's good to have them. And the main thing, once you have solved these things, people are very happy. We have a lot of positive feedback. We love it, and we love the fact that families came just to get informed and put the bottles on the machines and know how the problem of marine litter, how big it is in areas like that. So finally, never trust the wind. On the last day, we have the reverse vending machine throw away, and it was like a drama. This is more or less all I have to tell you. Thank you so much. What's next? We are going to get the reverse vending machines. Also, we have it right now. One of them was repaired, and we have it outdated and so. But the 2 of the visitor centers that we are going to be installed, one in Rodalpilar and the other one where it was at the beginning, are closed right now for actualizations and musealizations renovation. So we cannot, it's not open. So we are waiting for the visitor centers to open again. Many of the small businesses are learning a very good lesson, and they are motivated to try new circular economy strategies. And this is a change that we are seeing right now. We love it. It's a win-win situation for everyone, for the MPA, to the businesses, to the municipalities, everybody wants to be on board on these things, because circular economy is in fashion, and marine litter too. So a bigger network will be desirable for us. But maybe right now things are changing in Spain, and some kind of reverse vending machine system has been included in the new waste law somehow, in some way. I don't know how it's going to make it, or it's just only an opportunity. But little by little, we are put a little bit of or from our sides.
Thank you, Gloria. Really, thank you very much. It was, as always, very interesting to hear your story from a local perspective, because I think that this is what is really needed at the end of the day. We can talk about from a theoretical point of view And when things are needed to be put in practice, then this is where, on the one side, things become interesting, but on the other side is where we discover that much more work is needed. So I really liked your ending remark on that the point is that, okay, starting small and growing bigger. So this is one remark that I really liked, and I think that is a lesson learned for all of us. And then to never give up, you know, even if things seem very frustrating, simply because we are not, in many countries of the Mediterranean, we are not yet ready, on the one hand, to react at all fronts, and also to react in a coordinated way. So, and these local stories that we heard from you, from Carlo, from Caterina, provide us insights on how things can be done, or how things can be done differently, you know, to put things in motion. And gradually this will grow in a bigger wave, hopefully. As an internal optimist, this is all I can say. I see that there is a question for you. First of all, Gabriella is telling us that she found your story very inspiring, and she would like to know whether you have observed a litter accumulation reduction in your MPA.
Okay, this year this was very difficult to differentiate because since the pandemic, the last 2-3 years, during the first 2 years of the pandemic, we have a lot of visitors. People will think that nobody wants to come to places, to beaches. No, it's not like that. Everybody came here. We had more visitors than ever. So it was like a double amount of waste. So we started the pilot action with data that is maybe not realistic at all. And the last summer, where the machines were just working, it was like a little bit less. So we have less visitors, but also in the area of San Jose, I think it was a very good initiative, and we found that people left a little bit less bottles on the few beaches that are also one of the most visited in the natural park. There are Monsul Beach and Los Genoveses Beach. So I think yes, we can say that.
Thank you, Gloria. Thank you. Yeah, indeed, it's not in general. Many times we discuss about this, whether a measure putting it in motion, whether it resulted in the desirable change. And from a monitoring point of view, and this is why it's not accidental that the grand scheme of things, reporting, for example, for the implementation of legislation that applies at European seas, the reporting is every 6 years, because it has been documented that in order to illustrate any kind of changes within a given time frame, repeated cycles of application of measures are required, and continuous monitoring in order to be able to establish any kind of trend. So from another point of view, it is even if you wouldn't, because as you explained, you know, this kind of monitoring is required in order to kind of sort of normalize or hide or kick out the outlier effect that it was during, for example, the COVID season. So more time of implementation of this measure would be required, and repeated monitoring in order to establish the actual effect of this measure. We have received a lot of good words here in the chat. Really, it makes me smile, and it seems that our speakers have done a really good job in connecting with all of you. And I don't know if there are any questions. I didn't see any other questions. If not, I would like to repeat that we will send all of the materials of this webinar, the recordings, the presentations, these resource packs that we have been referring via email by tomorrow. Also, we will send you a small evaluation form. It will take you, I don't know, a couple of minutes to fill out, just to give us a feedback on how well or not this e-course worked, and whether there are any major comments for improvement. We would really like to have this for future use to make ourselves better. And before closing, perhaps I would like to pass the floor to Cristina if she would like to say something.
Thank you, Thomais. And I'm just showing one of the results of our project that you showed before. So I think, first of all, obviously, I would like to thanks to Thomais, to this very nice presentation of today, and how the message on the main activity that we have to run in the next years will be extremely clear. And I obviously, such as Thomais, I think the fantastic experience report to our friends, Caterina, Carlo, and finally to Gloria, our great friend Gloria, represent really how from the theory we pass on the reality, and how there is this fantastic involvement on the manager of the different marine protected area at Mediterranean scale. So I think that is a very important experience. And finally, I think just to give a more general overview, I think the experience that we have in this today represent really a kind of achievement of a goal that we are, I use this word, dreaming in the last decades, to binding together people with different background from different country, from Mediterranean, this marvelous Mediterranean Sea, in order to have, as Thomais say, the same language. So we need to have really the same language in terms to approach this basin problem. And I would like just to thank you, all of you, to participate to this training, and we hope that will be the beginning of a long story. Thank you again.
Thank you, Cristina, very much. Always Cristina's speeches are inspiring, and since I got very inspiring, the dream is extending to all the parts of the world, because as we saw, we had many participants also joining from very remote countries, far away from the Mediterranean. And I think that this illustrates the kind of global approach that is required in order to address the problem. And hopefully we will have a very ambitious plastics strategy and plastics plan at a worldwide level, to bind us all together in a more organized collective effort to dealing with the problem. So thank you all. Surprisingly, also today we finished a little bit earlier, which is we are setting a new precedent for the Mediterranean standards.
Do you think we have 2 minutes to try to do a family picture?
Yes, we can try. So please all open your cameras. And yeah, nice. Cristina is very fond of family photos. So open your cameras, look at your camera and smile. And maybe say hello.
Are you doing, Thomais? Okay.
So I will do it in 3 frames because we are too many. Okay, so first one will be 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Don't go anywhere. I will take also everyone, because we are 4 pages of people here. It would be nicer to see you in person, but so let's go now for the second one. 1, 2, 3, smile. And one more, okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. Perfect.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So thank you all. Thank you for joining.
Thank you, bye.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Bye. Goodbye.